Discover the profound secret that transforms everything after 50, when your inner world completely shifts and your true awakening begins, just as the master of human psychology once revealed. What if everything you believed about yourself was only half the truth? At 50 years old, something extraordinary occurs within the human psyche, a fundamental transformation that marks the beginning of genuine self-discovery. While society views aging as decline, psychology's founding father recognized it as tremendous gain. The walls of the unconscious begin crumbling, and what slumbered hidden for decades finally emerges into consciousness. This life phase isn't crisis, but liberation, an opportunity to remove masks worn for half a century. The mature mind now possesses strength to encounter the deepest layers of soul without being overwhelmed. You stand at the threshold of your most authentic existence. When you're ready to decode your inner life's mysteries, join us on this transformative journey. Subscribe to our channel and discover who you truly are. There comes a moment when the soul changes direction, not slowly or imperceptibly, but with the force of a river abandoning its course. This turning point at midlife represents one of human development's most significant moments. At 50, the unconscious begins speaking a new language. Imagine living your entire life in a house without knowing it had a basement. Suddenly you hear sounds from below. Initially you ignore them, but they grow louder, more urgent. This describes what happens at 50. Repressed unconscious contents knock on consciousness's door, and this time they won't be denied. People at midlife often experience strange restlessness, not superficial dissatisfaction triggered by external circumstances, but deep existential movement in personality's foundations. What most call midlife crisis was actually the beginning of true psychological maturity. The first 50 years we spend adapting, learning how to function, be loved, succeed. We develop what psychology calls the adapted self, a personality structure designed for worldly survival. But this adapted self represents only partial truth. Beneath it, in unconscious hidden chambers, our authentic self waits. At 50, this dynamic reverses. Psychic energy that flowed into adaptation for decades seeks new channels. Life drives turn inward rather than outward. Questions become important that seemed irrelevant before. Who am I really? What do I actually want? What makes life worth living? These questions don't arise from boredom or resignation, but from deep psychological need for truth. The unconscious, quiet so long, demands its due. It wants to be seen, heard, integrated. People who close themselves to this inner calling fall into psychological stagnation. They continue functioning, but stop truly living. The 50th birthday marks more than calendar date. It signals transition from life's first half to second, and this second half follows completely different laws. While the first half serves expansion, building career, family, social position, the second serves integration. It's no longer about becoming more, but becoming truer. This transformation often brings fears, fear of the unknown, fear of one's own depths, fear of change. But these fears are authenticity's price. Those who refuse inner transformation pay a much higher price: loss of vitality. The great turning at 50 isn't life disruption, but life in its deepest form. It's the moment when soul stops lying and begins living. It's the beginning of what psychology calls true existence, life guided not by others' expectations, but by inner truth. In coming chapters, we'll explore exactly what happens in this life phase. We'll understand why the unconscious becomes so powerful now, and how you can use this force to become who you really are. The journey begins with simple courage to look within. Have you ever wondered why certain dreams suddenly haunt you at 50? Why you wake at night thinking of people unseen for decades? Why old longings resurface that you thought long overcome? Psychology has an answer. Your unconscious no longer stays quiet. The psyche functions like a vast archive. Every experience, every suppressed emotion, every unlived dream gets carefully preserved there. In early decades, we're too busy building conscious life to pay much attention to this inner archive. But at 50, this changes dramatically. The unconscious never forgets. It collects, waits, prepares. When time is right, when the ego becomes strong enough to handle truth, it begins speaking. Not in reason's rational language, but in dreams' symbolic language, feelings, sudden insights. Picture a woman who spent her life as perfect wife and mother. At 50, she suddenly dreams of dancing, distant lands, unlived life. This isn't crisis beginning, but liberation. Her unconscious shows personality parts she sacrificed for decades to function properly. Or consider a man who placed career above everything. Suddenly, inexplicable longing for silence, nature, deep conversations overcomes him. His unconscious reminds him of soul parts neglected for professional success. Psychology calls these phenomena return of the repressed. What we push back in life's first half from necessity or social pressure returns in the second with doubled force. But it returns not as destruction, but as possibility for completeness. The fascinating part, the unconscious knows exactly when time has come. It senses when the ego is ready for great truths. That's why this opening usually doesn't happen before the 50th year. Before then, we would have been overwhelmed. Now we have maturity, experience, and crucially, often external security to face the inner journey. What your unconscious has hidden from you for decades aren't just forgotten dreams. They're also deep wounds never healed, fears of intimacy hidden behind success, anger at injustice transformed into conformity, grief for unmourned losses translated into activism or busyness. Psychology understood. These repressed contents haven't disappeared. They've transformed into symptoms. Unexplained fatigue, chronic dissatisfaction, feelings of emptiness despite external success, all are unconscious messages saying, it's time. Time for truth. Time for wholeness. Looking inward isn't luxurious self-discovery trip, but psychological necessity. The soul demands its wholeness back. It wants to integrate split-off parts, honor lost dreams, acknowledge unlived possibilities. This doesn't mean completely overturning your life. It means starting to be honest with yourself, asking what in me was never seen, which voice in me was never heard, which part of my personality waits to finally be lived. The unconscious speaks through symptoms, dreams, sudden feelings, longings from nowhere. Those who learn this language discover treasures of unused potential, unlived vitality, authentic power. At 50, the door to this inner wealth opens. The only question, do you have courage to enter? There comes a moment when you suddenly understand you stand exactly at life's center. Behind you lies complete biography. Ahead, unwritten story. This position between what was and what could still be creates unique psychological tension. Psychology recognized in this tension the key to soul transformation. The mature soul finds itself in fascinating reorganization state. What seemed firmly fixed for decades suddenly becomes negotiable. Priorities that determined your life stand for review. Roles you played question their justification. It's as if the psyche reviews its entire inventory and decides what stays, what goes, what becomes new. Imagine thoroughly cleaning your inner house for the first time after 50 years. In every corner, you find forgotten treasures and superfluous baggage. A youth dream you thought unrealistic suddenly gleams again. A conviction that seemed important proves outdated. A relationship maintained from habit shows its emptiness. Psychology observed that this psychological reorganization often begins with intense confrontation with one's own mortality, not as morbid fixation, but as healing confrontation with finitude. Suddenly it becomes clear, time is limited. Every day, every decision, every relationship gains weight. The question, what is really important, becomes the most urgent of all questions. This recognition works like psychological cleaning agent. What's superfluous becomes visible. What's essential crystallizes. Midlife people often begin saying no to things they would have automatically accepted before. They stop pleasing others and start pleasing themselves. They trade quantity for quality. The past appears in new light. Events you experienced as defeats suddenly reveal their teaching function. Decisions you regretted show their hidden wisdom. Psychology spoke of retrospective meaning-making, the mature psyche's ability to give coherent sense to one's own story. Simultaneously, the view of future opens in new ways. It's no longer about keeping all possibilities open, but selecting the right ones. The mature soul develops fine intuition for which paths belong to it and which don't. It becomes more selective, but also more decisive. This reorganization isn't always pleasant. Psychology knew the pains of self-recognition. When you realize you've lived the wrong life for decades, that's initially shattering. When you understand certain relationships were based on illusion, that hurts. When you must accept some dreams will never be realized, that's sad. But psychology also recognized this pain is authenticity's price, and it's temporary. What follows is deep satisfaction, the satisfaction of finally arriving at yourself. The mature soul no longer needs to fight, prove itself, or pretend. It can simply be. Psychological reorganization at 50 isn't one-time event but process, a dialogue between what was and what could be, a negotiation between past demands and future promises. At the end stands new synthesis, a personality more integrated, authentic, and vibrant than ever before. This reorganization is your chance at second life, not as escape from the first, but as completion of what was begun, but not yet realized in the first. The mature soul gathers its story's fragments and joins them into new, harmonious whole. The question is, are you ready for this sacred reorganization of yourself? Imagine you've worn invisible chains your entire life, so naturally that you thought them part of your body. At 50, these chains suddenly begin hurting, and you recognize they were never part of you. You can remove them. Psychology called these chains repetition compulsions, unconscious patterns that hold us captive without our notice. The first decades we spend perfecting these patterns. The child who learned it's only loved when perfect becomes the adult who works themselves to death. The child who had to take responsibility early becomes the person who can never say no. The child who feared rejection becomes the person who hides their true needs. These patterns arise from necessity. They were once survival strategies, often even brilliant solutions for difficult circumstances. The problem, what saved us as children, can suffocate us as adults. Psychology recognized that we tend to repeat these old solutions again and again, even when the original problems no longer exist. At 50, something liberating happens. These old patterns' power begins to wane. Not automatically, but their change becomes possible for the first time. The ego has become strong enough to break free from the past's shadows. The question is no longer, how do I survive, but how do I really live? Do you recognize yourself in the woman who believed her whole life she must be there for everyone? At 50, she begins feeling, it's okay to be there for myself too, or in the man who has hidden his feelings since childhood. Suddenly he notices, vulnerability isn't weakness, but strength. This liberation doesn't happen overnight. It begins with small rebellions against one's own system. You say no for the first time to an obligation you don't really want. You express an opinion even if it's unpopular. You allow yourself pleasure you would have denied before. Each of these small liberations weakens old patterns and strengthens the authentic self. Psychology understood that this liberation triggers fear. Old patterns give us security even if they confine us. Who am I if I'm no longer the perfectionist? What happens if I stop pleasing everyone? These fears are normal and understandable, but they're not insurmountable. The mature psyche has a decisive advantage. It can distinguish between past and present. It can understand. What was necessary then might be hindering today. The parents we had to please then might be long dead. The circumstances that threatened us then no longer exist today. At 50, you begin understanding that you created most of your own boundaries, not from malice or stupidity, but from childish logic that's long outdated. This recognition is simultaneously frightening and liberating. Frightening because you realize how much life you might have wasted. Liberating because you understand. From now on, you can choose. Liberation from old patterns doesn't mean you must overthrow your entire life. It means you can start making conscious decisions. Instead of reacting automatically, you can pause and ask, what do I really want? What suits me? What makes my life richer? This new freedom is initially unfamiliar, like a bird that spent its whole life in a cage and suddenly must fly. But with time, you develop trust in your new freedom of movement. You discover sides of yourself that were hidden for decades. You experience feelings you had forgotten. You dream dreams you thought impossible. Real life begins when you stop living the life others intended for you and start living the life that's laid out within you. At 50, you finally have the strength for it. The chains fall away. The question is, are you ready to fly? There are truths we hide from ourselves for a lifetime, not from cowardice, but from self-protection. At 50, however, this protection becomes a trap. What once preserved us now prevents us from living. Psychology recognized courage for truth is the key to soul liberation. Think about the conflicts that secretly determine your life. The struggle between what you want and what you believe you must have. The tension between your public role and private longings. The fight between the part of you that loves and the part that wants to protect itself. These inner contradictions aren't weakness, they're human. Psychology understood that these conflicts arise when different parts of our personality pursue different goals. The superego wants to be perfect. The id wants to be free. The ego tries to mediate. For decades, we juggle these contradictory forces, but at 50, we can learn to integrate them. The first step is recognition. You must be ready to look at what you'd rather ignore. The anger you hide under politeness, the sadness you drown out with activity, the fear of intimacy you disguise as independence. These feelings are messengers of unmet needs. Picture a man torn between desire for recognition and fear of failure. He works himself up, but no achievement is good enough. At 50, he can finally understand the conflict lies within himself. The part that needs recognition fights the part that fears failure. Or a woman torn between need for love and fear of injury. She longs for closeness but sabotages relationships. Only at midlife can she recognize both parts are justified. The key isn't suppressing one, but honoring both. Integration requires what psychology calls therapeutic self-dialogue. You must learn to dialogue with all parts of your personality. Ask the anxious part, what do you fear? The angry part, what do you need? The sad part, what do you miss? This inner conversation takes time and practice. At 50, you have enough life experience to understand the different voices within you. You can recognize where they come from and how they can be reconciled. Courage for truth also means letting go of old lies. The lie that you must be strong to be loved. The lie that you must be perfect to be valuable. These lies were once necessary, but now you can live without them. Psychology recognized that most psychological suffering arises from unresolved inner conflicts. Depression often from conflict between anger and self-reproach. Anxiety from conflict between desires and prohibitions. Emptiness from conflict between authentic needs and external expectations. The solution isn't eliminating these conflicts. That's impossible. The solution is making them conscious and integrating them. Understanding that you're big enough to carry contradictions within yourself. At 50, you develop psychological capacity for what psychology calls ambiguity tolerance, the ability to live with ambiguity without needing to resolve it. This ability is the cornerstone of soul maturity. Courage for truth transforms your conflicts from enemies into advisors. You stop fighting and begin understanding. You become what you always were, a complex but complete human being. Truth about yourself is the greatest gift you can give yourself at 50. There are two births in human life. The first when we enter this world, the second when we find ourselves at 50. Psychology recognized in this second birth the true beginning of authentic life, the moment when we stop becoming what others expect of us and start being who we really are. This second birth is no less dramatic than the first. It brings a new self to the world, one no longer ruled by past fears, but guided by experience's wisdom. A self that has integrated its shadows and can therefore stand in light. A self that has healed its wounds and can therefore heal others. Imagine looking in the mirror and truly recognizing yourself for the first time. Not the face you've known for decades, but the person behind it. The person who has removed all masks, who no longer plays roles, who simply is. This is the second half of life's gift, permission for authenticity. This new self operates by different principles. It no longer asks, "What do others think of me?" but "What do I think of myself?" It no longer seeks world recognition, but peace with itself. It no longer fights against its nature, but works with it. Psychology observed that people after this transformation acquire special radiance, a calm that comes from within, a clarity that nothing can shake, a serenity that grows from accepting one's own completeness. They've stopped searching because they found what they always sought, themselves. This new authenticity changes all relationships. You can finally love without losing yourself. You can open without hurting yourself. You can be close without abandoning your boundaries. Why? Because you know who you are. And whoever knows themselves can protect themselves while simultaneously giving themselves away. The new self has a different relationship with time. It no longer lives for the future or in the past, but in the now. Every moment becomes precious because it's consciously experienced. Every experience becomes deeper because it's authentic. Every encounter becomes more meaningful because it comes from a true self. With this second birth also emerges a new relationship with death, not as enemy, but as advisor. Death reminds us that life is finite, thereby making every day more valuable. Psychology understood only those who accept death as part of life can become truly alive. The new self develops a special form of love, no longer the needy love of life's first half, but the giving love of maturity. It loves because it can, not because it must. It gives because it's full, not because it wants to be filled. It touches other lives because it has found its own depth. This transformation also brings new responsibility. The mature self becomes wisdom's guardian, a bridge builder between generations. It has the task of passing on what was learned, guiding the younger ones, leaving the world a little better than it was found. The second birth isn't a one-time event, but an ongoing process. Every day you can choose anew, the old adapted self or the new authentic one. Every day you can decide fear or love, mask or truth, survival or living. Psychology recognized this second half of life isn't descent from the peak, but ascent to a new one. Not the end of possibilities, but the beginning of realization. Not loss of youth, but gain of wisdom. At 50, you haven't grown older, you've grown truer. You haven't lost strength, you found your true strength. You don't stand before the end, you stand before the beginning of your authentic life. The second birth gives you the most precious gift, permission to be yourself. Accept it. You've undertaken a journey through your own soul secrets. You've understood that the 50th birthday isn't the end of a story, but the beginning of the true one. You've recognized that your unconscious isn't an enemy, but an ally on the path to authenticity. You've learned that the conflicts within you don't want to be overcome, but integrated. And you've discovered that the second half of life isn't descent, but ascent to your true self. Psychology gave the world more than just theory. It gave us permission to look deeply, be honest, and become complete. At 50 doesn't begin the end, but the completion of what was laid out within you. Which hidden truth in your inner world waits to finally be lived, and are you ready to meet it? Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. We love connecting with our global community of truth seekers. If this inner journey touched you somehow, hit that like button and subscribe to our channel.